Please, not the king." She went cold when she saw the boots of the one man who could never find her. The kingdom of Arendor had not known spring in 20 years. The orchards bloomed in ash, the rivers ran slow and black, and the wind whispered secrets that no one dared to speak aloud. People said the land mourned for the day the king made his pact with the Veil, a shadowed realm older than memory itself. No one saw him smile. No one dared question the shadows that followed his steps. Yet even in a kingdom bound by fear, there were whispers of hope. A girl named Elira Thorne lived far from the palace, beyond the borders where soldiers rarely ventured. She was quiet, careful, and unseen. To the villagers, she was simply a healer, her hands gentle, her voice soft. But beneath the cloth that covered her wrists, silver runes glowed faintly, marking her as something extraordinary, something the king had once claimed as his own. Elira had once been a princess, promised to King Valor Draven. She had known the cold grandeur of the palace, the weight of expectations, and the strange loneliness of being desired by a man whose heart was shadowed even then. But she had fled. She had run not from love but from fear. Fear of the darkness she had glimpsed in him, fear of the king himself, and fear of what the veil might demand from her if she stayed. For 10 long years, she had survived in hiding. She had lived in villages where no one knew her name, where the world beyond their borders felt safer than the marble halls of her childhood. The runes on her wrists spent fate itself, shielding her from the eyes of those who sought her, including the king. And yet, fate has a way of finding those who hide from it. It began with whispers carried by the wind, a rumor of soldiers traveling north, wounded and desperate, carrying tales of creatures born from the veil itself. One evening, under the cover of fog, a small patrol appeared at her village. Their armor was scorched, their eyes hollow with fear, and their bodies bore wounds that no healer had seen before. Elira could not ignore them. She tended to the soldiers in secret, her hood drawn low, her voice calm as she pressed cloths to burns and whispered prayers over injuries. She thought she was safe until the sound came. Heavy boots. Boots that echoed with authority and history. Boots that could freeze the blood of the bravest warrior. The soldiers stopped speaking mid-breath. Their eyes darted to the doorway, wide with terror, and their hands went to the hilts of their swords. Elira felt her heart clench in her chest. She froze, every nerve screaming. She had known this sound once, a sound she had tried to bury in memory. She had known it in a marble hall, beneath gilded chandeliers, when a young prince had worn the same boots and the same weight of power on his shoulders. She wanted to run. She wanted to hide. But it was too late. The door opened slowly, and the candlelight fell across him. Black iron greaves etched with the royal crest, a cloak of deep midnight that seemed to drink in the shadows around him. And a crown that was not merely gold, but something alive, fused to his flesh, glinting faintly like fire beneath his hair. King Valor Draven had come. Elira's breath stopped, not out of fear of death, but out of disbelief. She had believed he would never find her. She had believed the runes would protect her, the fog would hide her, and the borders would hold. She had been wrong. The king's gaze swept over the soldiers, sharp and precise, then paused. It was not on their faces, not on the walls, not even on the glowing runes around her wrists. until the faintest flicker of recognition ignited within his eyes. Recognition. Something stirred in the shadows clinging to him, something ancient and patient. Elira felt the temperature drop, felt the air thicken with unspoken power. The room seemed smaller suddenly, and she was aware of every heartbeat, every breath, every tremble in her own hands. He spoke her name, softly, almost as if he feared breaking it. Elira. It was not anger. It was a whisper that carried across years, across distance, across every moment she had hidden. It was the sound of a memory made flesh. Elira went cold. Not from fear of the soldiers, not from fear of the shadows, not from fear of the veil itself, but from the realization that the one man who could never find her had just done so. The king's eyes, as dark as the night outside, flickered with a strange emotion she could not name. There was longing there, yes, but also restraint, calculation, and a pain that ran deeper than she could imagine. The soldiers around him bowed instinctively, but he did not lower his gaze from her. Her mind raced. She could flee, she could run into the mist outside, she could disappear among the village huts, among the trees. But she could not. The magic in her veins, the magic of the runes, was alive now, responding to the presence of the king, revealing her location even as she wished to vanish. I am no one, she said, her voice trembling, though she tried to steady it. You are never no one, he replied. His voice was low, steady, commanding, yet softer than she remembered. You were never meant to be hidden. She swallowed hard. Every instinct screamed to flee, but the pull between them, invisible and inescapable, rooted her to the spot. The soldiers murmured among themselves, but none dared speak louder than the king's shadowed presence. For a long moment, neither moved. The only sounds were the distant groans of the wind, the crackling of candle flames, and the soft hum of the runes beneath her sleeves. You should not have come, she whispered finally, a mixture of fear and awe in her voice. It is not safe. Not for you. Not for anyone. I came because it is not safe, he said, because the darkness is spreading and the kingdom is bleeding, and because you... His gaze softened almost imperceptibly, and the air seemed to shiver around them. Because you are the only one who can help. She had spent 10 years hiding from him, hiding from the world, living quietly, pretending to be small. And now, just like that, the world had returned to demand her presence. What if I fail? She asked, though her voice was barely more than a whisper. Then I will face it with you, he said. And the weight of his words was heavier than any armor, heavier than any crown, heavier than any shadow that clung to him. The room seemed to pulse with tension, a fragile balance between fear and desire, between loyalty and longing, between what was lost and what could be reclaimed. Elira wanted to step back, to hide beneath her hood, to disappear into the fog, but she could not. Not entirely. Not when she felt the faint echo of the boy he had once been, the man she had once loved, still buried somewhere beneath the crown and the shadows. The soldiers, sensing the fragile truce between them, lowered their heads. None dared move. None dared speak. They had seen enough of the king to know he was not to be crossed, but even they felt the tremor in the air, the change that came with the reunion of the hidden princess and the shadowed king. "Elara," he said again, voice carrying the weight of years and unspoken regrets. "Do you remember the night before you left?" She flinched, the memory sharp as a blade. The night of laughter and whispers, of promises unspoken, and hearts too young to understand their own power. The night she had chosen the path of exile, the path of survival, the path of hiding from the one man she had once loved. "I remember," she said finally, her voice steadying as she met his gaze. "I remember everything." A flicker of something passed through his eyes. Pain, longing, sorrow, and perhaps a hope he did not dare speak aloud. And then, as if the world itself were holding its breath, he stepped closer. The candlelight caught the edge of his crown, the iron of his boots, the shadows clinging to his cloak. The runes on her wrists glowed faintly in response, a silent song of recognition and power. Elira's heart thundered. She knew the choice she had to make. She could run. She could vanish. She could hide, but she also knew that running would not save her. Not now. Not when the king himself had come into her life again. "You were never meant to hide," he said once more, voice barely more than a whisper, yet carrying across the room like a decree. Her breath caught. She had lived 10 years in shadows, surviving in silence, believing that her absence would protect her. Now she realized that the king's shadow had always followed her, even from afar, even through time and distance. And the truth, bitter and beautiful, hit her harder than fear ever could. She had never truly been safe. Not from the king. Not from fate. Not from herself. The king reached for the door, pausing, his hand hovering above the latch, as though daring the world to intervene. Outside, the night waited, silent and patient. The air was thick with the smell of fog and cold stone, carrying the promise of danger, of war, of secrets yet to be revealed. Elira felt the pull of destiny, stronger than any instinct to flee. The one man who could never find her had found her. And the veil, unseen yet present, seemed to stir with anticipation. Elira's heart had not settled since that moment. The sound of King Valor's voice, the weight of his presence, lingered in her mind like a song she could not forget. She had fled once, believing safety lay in shadow, in distance, in anonymity. Now, she understood that safety was an illusion. The king had found her. Fate had pulled her back into the palace, and the world she thought she had left behind was alive with danger once more. The royal escort that had brought her from the village did not treat her as a prisoner, nor did they treat her as a guest. Their silence was careful, measured, filled with curiosity and caution. The palace loomed above them as they returned, more imposing than she remembered, towers dark against the night sky, banners heavy with the royal crest, and torches flickering like the eyes of unseen watchers. Elira tried not to tremble as she stepped across the threshold. Memories of her childhood echoed in every corridor, the soft whispers of servants, the scent of candle wax, the cold touch of marble. She had once walked these halls as a princess, with the king beside her, unaware that their world would be broken by shadows. Now, everything was different. The palace felt both familiar and alien, haunted by years of absence and secrecy. King Valor did not speak as they entered. He followed silently, a shadow trailing her steps. The soldiers bowed, and servants hurried past with lowered eyes. Even the air seemed to change in his presence, heavier, charged with unspoken power. When they arrived at her old chambers, preserved as if she might return at any moment, Elira's chest tightened. The curtains were still the deep violet she had chosen, and the book she had read aloud lay untouched on the shelves. Nothing had changed. Nothing except the man who now waited at the doorway, silent and watchful. He spoke at last, his voice quiet but steady. "You should not have come here." "I had no choice," she replied, though her voice was firmer than she felt. "I did not ask to return." He stepped into the room, his eyes scanning her face with a careful intensity. "You are not safe outside these walls, and neither are you," she said softly, glancing at the shadows that clung to him like living armor. "I have seen what haunts you. I have seen the veil's reach." He flinched slightly at the mention, but his expression remained controlled. "And yet, I must face it," he said. "Every hour, every day. It is my burden, and it is why you are here." Elira's stomach tightened. She had expected anger, disappointment, maybe even punishment. But his words revealed something far more dangerous: vulnerability. He trusted her enough to speak the truth, and that trust carried a weight heavier than any crown. "Why me?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. "Why now?" "The runes on your wrists, they are not just marks of protection. They are part of a spell that can balance the veil. You were never meant to hide, Elira. You were meant to save what I could not." She looked down at her hands wrapped beneath layers of cloth and felt the glow of the runes beneath her skin. For 10 years she had believed they protected her, shielding her from the king and the world. Now, she understood that they carried a purpose far greater than concealment. They were a key, and she held it unknowingly all along. "Do you expect me to do this?" she asked, a tremor in her voice. "To face the curse, the veil, the creatures that have haunted your kingdom for years?" He approached slowly, careful not to overwhelm her. "No," he said. "I expect you to choose. The choice is yours. But know this: if you refuse, the kingdom will fall, and the veil will consume everything." She had fled to survive, to live a quiet life far from crowns and shadows. And yet, the weight of responsibility pressed down on her. Could she ignore the lives of those who suffered beyond the palace walls? Could she abandon the king who had carried this burden alone for so long? She shook her head. "I cannot do nothing," she said finally. "But I am not sure I am enough." Vaylor's expression softened, just enough to reveal the man he had been before the crown, before the curse, before the shadows claimed him. "You are more than enough," he said. "You have always been more than you know, and I cannot do this without you." She remembered the boy she had known, the man who had once looked at her with tenderness and hope. That man had not survived the years of ruling, of carrying the curse, of hiding from the veil. Yet beneath the shadowed exterior, traces remained, traces of the love they had shared, buried beneath duty and despair. For the next several days, Elira moved carefully through the palace, tending to soldiers and citizens wounded by the growing unrest at the borders. She avoided the king as best she could, yet he was always nearby, watching, guarding, silently urging her toward a purpose she could barely understand. She could see the cost of his rule etched on his face, the lines of exhaustion, the shadows under his eyes, the restless tension in his posture. And yet, he never faltered, never wavered, never demanded more than she could give. One evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon and cast long shadows across the palace courtyard, she found herself standing on the balcony, staring at the distant mountains where the veil rifts had begun to open. The wind carried the scent of ash and rain and the faint whispers of creatures she could not see. "Do you remember this place?" a voice asked behind her. She turned to see him there, silent, as if he had always been waiting. The shadows clung to him, but his eyes were softer than she remembered. "I do," she said, her voice steady despite the unease curling in her chest. "It was my favorite place in the palace. I used to watch the stars from here, thinking I could escape the world if I only climbed high enough." "And did you?" he asked, a faint edge of amusement in his tone. "I tried," she admitted, "but the world has a way of finding you, even when you hide." He stepped closer, and she felt the air between them thrum with unspoken tension. "And now it has," he said simply. Her heart quickened. Every instinct told her to flee, to hide, to protect herself from the pull she felt, and yet there was something in his presence that made running impossible. She had spent 10 years away from him, and in that time she had imagined this moment countless times, each one ending differently, each one filled with fear and longing. "Valor," she said softly, using his name as if speaking it aloud could anchor her to reality. "You carry too much alone. You should not bear this burden without help." "I have no choice," he replied. "The curse is mine. The crown is mine. But you are a choice. And yet, even now, I fear what might happen if you join me." She looked at him, truly looked, and saw the fear beneath the surface. The fear of losing himself, the fear of failing, the fear of letting her suffer because of him. It was a fear she had once known in herself, and one she now recognized in him. "Then let us face it together," she said, reaching out her hand. "We do not have to be afraid, not if we stand side by side." He hesitated, the shadows around him seeming to pulse and shift. Then slowly he extended his hand to meet hers. The moment their fingers touched, a spark of light flared from the runes on her wrists, intertwining with the shadows around him. It was a fragile balance, a mixture of fear and hope, of darkness and light, of past and future. For a moment, the world seemed to hold its breath. Then the wind picked up, carrying the distant roar of creatures from the vale, and the castle walls trembled as though reacting to the power awakened between them. Alira pulled back slightly, fear and awe mingling in her chest. "We cannot wait," she whispered. "The veil grows stronger each day. If we delay, it may be too late." Valor nodded, his gaze locked on hers, unwavering. "Then we must act," he said. "But understand this, even as we fight the darkness, you must know that the bond between us, it cannot be ignored. It has always existed, whether we acknowledged it or not." Her breath caught at his words. She had tried to bury the past, to survive apart from him, to live a quiet life. And yet, the truth remained. She had never truly escaped him, and he had never truly let her go. The night grew deeper, shadows stretching across the courtyard, and the stars appeared faintly above, as if watching them, as if holding their own breath. The air thrummed with tension, with unspoken longing, with the weight of destiny pressing down on them both. "Elira," he said, his voice low and filled with emotion. "Do you understand what lies ahead? The path we take, it will not be easy. There will be danger, betrayal, and loss. And yet—" He paused, searching her eyes. "I cannot face it without you." She nodded, her resolve hardening. "Then I will not let you face it alone," she said. "We will stand together, whatever comes." And as the wind whispered through the castle towers, carrying the distant roar of the Vale, they both knew that their reunion was only the beginning. The darkness that had haunted the kingdom for decades was stirring, and the fate of all would soon rest in the hands of the girl who hid from crowns, and the king who could not let her go. The Vale's storms had grown stronger with each passing day. Shadows crawled along the palace walls like living ink, and whispers of creatures unseen drifted through the corridors at night. Soldiers and villagers alike spoke in hushed tones of figures glimpsed in the mist, eyes glowing like embers, and of sounds that seemed to come from the air itself. Elira could feel it everywhere she went. The runes on her wrists burned faintly, pulsing with power she did not yet fully understand. Every time she moved near King Valor, the shadows clung tighter to him, and the air around them thrummed with a strange, unsteady magic. She had chosen not to run this time. She had stepped into the palace not as a fugitive, but as someone bound by fate to the king, and perhaps to the kingdom itself. The decision weighed heavily on her. For 10 years she had lived quietly, unseen, unnoticed. Now she was the center of attention, the keystone in a plan written long before her birth, and the only person capable of balancing the Vale's power. Valor had grown more distant in some ways, though closer in others. He was kind to the soldiers, fair to the villagers, but when he was with her, the air was always heavy with unspoken words. Their conversations were careful, measured. Every glance, every touch seemed to carry the weight of the years they had been apart. Neither could fully speak of the emotions simmering beneath their restraint. One evening Elira found herself in the ancient library of the palace, a room few entered and fewer understood. Dust motes danced in the fading light, and the air smelled of old parchment and forgotten knowledge. Here, she sought answers about the Vale, about the rifts, and about the magic that pulsed through her veins. The library was silent except for the soft rustle of her fingers brushing against the spines of books. Her eyes caught a fragment of a scroll, yellowed with age, its words faint but legible. As she read, her pulse quickened. "When shadow weds light, not in power but in surrender, the crown shall break, and the veil shall close." Her breath caught. A prophecy. A path that spoke not of death or sacrifice, but of union. But the words were vague, leaving room for interpretation and doubt. Could she trust it? Could Valor trust it? She did not have long to consider, for a shadow shifted at the entrance to the library. Valor's silhouette appeared, framed by the flickering candlelight. He moved with silent authority, yet there was a hesitance in his step, as if he feared what he might find. You've been reading the prophecies, he said softly. I found one, she replied, rolling the scroll carefully. It speaks of shadow and light. It says the crown can be broken and the veil closed, but not by death, not by sacrifice, by union. Shadows clung to him more tightly, twisting like smoke. Do you think you understand what that means? He asked. His voice was low, cautious, and there was an edge of fear beneath it. I think it means that we must face it together, she said, meeting his eyes. That we cannot separate our powers if we hope to succeed, that whatever is coming, we must meet it as one. He shook his head slowly. It is too dangerous, he said. You do not know the full extent of the curse, the veil, or what could happen if our powers merge. I cannot ask you to risk yourself for me. You have asked me to risk myself simply by existing in your world, she countered. I have already risked everything. And I am not afraid of you or the veil, not when I can help stop it. The Veiler's hand hovered near hers, but he did not touch her. The tension between them was almost unbearable. Their history, their shared past, and the power of the runes thrumming beneath her skin created a connection that neither could deny, yet neither could fully embrace. You must understand, he said finally, his voice breaking slightly. The veil will not wait. It will not wait for courage, for love, for readiness. It will consume everything if we delay. And yet, I cannot force you. She reached out, letting her hand brush his sleeve. Then do not ask me to leave, she said. Ask me to stand by you. That is all I need. For a moment, he looked as if he might pull her close, might let the shadows vanish with the warmth of his trust. But the shadows were stronger than his desire, twisting and coiling, reminding him of the power he could not relinquish. Instead, he turned, silent and deliberate, leaving her with the weight of unspoken longing and the faint glow of her runes. The next morning, the kingdom shook. From the northern rifts, creatures born of sorrow and shadow had begun to spill into the lands surrounding Arendor villages, were burned, forests twisted into unnatural forms, and the rivers ran dark with ash. Soldiers rushed to defend the borders, but the Veil's forces were relentless. Elira and Valor met in the war room, the chamber lined with maps and ancient relics. The king's face was etched with concern, though he maintained his composure. You must come with me, he said, motioning to the northern borders. You cannot remain safe in the palace. The magic in your veins will be needed. She nodded, determination set in her jaw. Then we go together, she said. I will not stand aside while the kingdom falls. They rode north, the wind whipping through their cloaks, shadows twisting in response to the growing power of the veil. Along the way, Elira began to understand the magnitude of what they faced. The creatures were not mindless beasts. They were fragments of sorrow and rage, remnants of lives consumed by the veil's influence. Every encounter tested their strength, their patience, and their trust in one another. During a brief moment of respite, as they camped under a sky filled with restless stars, Valor spoke quietly. Do you know why I have searched for you all these years? He asked, his voice almost a whisper against the crackling fire. Because of the kingdom? She asked. No, he replied, shaking his head. Because you were the only one who could keep me human. I feared that without you, I would become nothing but shadow. I let you go to protect you, but in truth, I could not survive without knowing where you were. The truth lay bare between them, exposing the fragile threads of trust and longing that had endured a decade of absence. I never wanted to leave, she whispered. I had to, but I never stopped hoping that one day fate would bring us back together. The night was silent except for the wind and the faint whisper of magic weaving through the trees. Their hands brushed, tentative, testing the connection they both feared and craved. The runes on her wrists flared in response, mingling with the shadows surrounding him. Before they could speak further, a scream pierced the night. A shadow creature, larger and more terrifying than any they had seen, leapt from the darkness, eyes glowing red with hunger and fury. Valor drew his sword, the shadows twisting around it, forming a protective barrier. Alira extended her hands, the runes on her wrists glowing bright, forming a shield that intertwined with his magic. Together they faced the creature, their powers weaving together in a dance of light and shadow, fear and determination, love and survival. The creature struck, and the ground shook beneath them. Valor's sword clashed with the creature's claws, sparks flying, while Elira's magic rippled through the air, striking at the veil-born shadow. Their combined strength forced the creature to retreat, but the effort left them both drained, their hearts pounding, their breaths ragged. Elira looked at him, her eyes reflecting both fear and awe. "We are stronger together," she said, voice trembling. Valor nodded, though the shadows around him shifted uneasily. "Yes, but the veil is growing. This is only the beginning." They pressed on toward the northern rift, each step heavier than the last. The air grew colder, the sky darker, and the veil's influence more oppressive. Yet through it all, the connection between them deepened. Every glance, every touch, every shared moment of trust was a reminder of what had been lost and what could be reclaimed. As they neared the rift, the ground trembled violently. Shadows rose from the earth like living smoke, coiling and twisting, forming shapes that were almost human, almost familiar. The runes on Alira's wrists blazed with light, and the shadows around Valor surged, responding to the growing power of the veil. He turned to her, eyes filled with both determination and fear. "This is where the choice begins," he said. "The rift will not wait. We must act, or everything will be lost." The prophecy, the veil, the creatures, they were all here. The moment of decision had arrived. She was no longer hiding. She was no longer just a girl fleeing crowns. She was a force intertwined with the king, bound by magic, by fate, and by something older, deeper, and unspoken between them. And then from the heart of the rift a voice echoed, not spoken aloud, but felt in their bones. A whisper older than time itself. "Choose or be consumed." Elira's hand tightened around Valor's. The runes burned brighter than ever. Shadows twisted and writhed, testing the limits of his control. Valor met her gaze, and for the first time in years, the man beneath the crown, the boy she had loved, broke through the shadowed mask. "Do you trust me?" he asked, voice raw with fear and hope. She nodded, tears shining in the firelight. Always. Together, they stepped toward the rift, the air alive with magic, the ground trembling, the veil roaring with anticipation. The rift yawned before them like a wound in the world, a jagged tear in the sky that dripped shadow into the land below. The veil had grown furious, spilling creatures born of sorrow, rage, and despair into the air. The northern lands quaked beneath their weight, and the rivers ran black with shadow-tainted water. Elira stood beside Velor, the runes on her wrists burning brighter than ever. Every step they took toward the rift sent ripples through the air, stirring the magic that connected them. The king's shadow swirled protectively around him, alive with tension, twisting and writhing like a living storm. "This is it," Baylor said quietly, voice barely above the roar of the wind. "Beyond this point, the veil will test everything, our strength, our trust, our willingness to face what we fear most." Elira met his gaze, her chest tightening. "Then we face it together," she said. "No holding back. No secrets. We end this, or we fail completely." He nodded. His eyes, dark and stormy, softened with the faintest trace of the man she had loved before. The crown and the curse consumed him. "I do not ask you to risk yourself for me," he said. "I ask you to stand with me as an equal. That is all I can give, and all I can hope for." The air thickened as they stepped into the rift. Shadows reached for them like living hands, testing their will, probing for weakness. Elira felt the magic in her veins pulse in response, weaving with the king's dark power in a delicate, dangerous dance. Each step toward the heart of the veil was heavier than the last. Each breath carried the weight of centuries of sorrow and despair. A figure emerged from the swirling shadows, a massive creature, its body coiled with smoke, eyes burning with malice, and claws that seemed to slice reality itself. It was born of every pain and loss that had ever been inflicted upon the kingdom. Its roar echoed across the rift, shaking the stones beneath their feet. Velor raised his sword, shadows spiraling around it like living armor. "Stay close," he commanded. She extended her hands, the runes flaring to life, their glow intertwining with the shadows that surrounded him. "We face it as one," she said. The creature lunged, and magic collided with shadow. Sparks of light and darkness danced across the rift, blinding and beautiful. Elira felt the energies surge through her, a mixture of fear, power, and determination. The creature's claws struck, and Velor blocked with his sword, a hiss of energy meeting steel. "You cannot fight it alone!" Elira cried, stepping closer. The runes on her wrists glowed fiercely, and she unleashed a pulse of magic that wrapped around the creature, binding its shadow. Velor added his own power, and together they forced it back into the swirling darkness. Breathing heavily, they stood side by side, knowing this was only the beginning. The rift's heart awaited, and with it, the final challenge. As they moved deeper, the shadows grew thicker, more oppressive, and the air shimmered with magic. The veil whispered in their ears, voices of long-dead kings and queens, pleading spirits, echoes of the lost and forgotten. The whispers spoke of surrender, of power, of fear. Valor's hand brushed hers, tentative yet firm. "Elira, if we fail, all will be lost. I cannot bear the thought of losing you. Not now, not ever." "I am not afraid," she said, meeting his gaze. We will face this together. I trust you. For a moment, the world seemed to hold its breath. Shadows twisted violently around them, and the rift pulsed as if alive. The prophecy she had read, the one that spoke of shadow and light, of union and surrender, reverberated in her mind. This was the moment it spoke of. You must surrender control, she said softly. Not to the veil, to each other. Vaylor's eyes widened, understanding dawning. To merge our magic, we must trust fully. To let the other lead, even when we fear it most. Yes. If we hesitate, the veil will win. But if we act as one, it can be closed, and the curse broken. They took a deep breath, and then the final ritual began. Their hands met, fingers entwining, magic sparking between them. Light and shadow danced together, clashing and blending, a symphony of power and trust. The runes on her wrists flared brilliantly, wrapping around the crown of his head, the shadows responding, twisting and recoiling. Vaylor's voice trembled. Elira, are you certain? I am, she whispered. I choose this. I choose us. The veil screamed, a sound that shook the air and rattled their bones. But they held firm. Their magic intertwined, forming a bridge between light and darkness, between past and future, between fear and love. The rift pulsed violently, then began to shrink, shadows retreating as their bond strengthened. In the eye of the veil they saw visions of their past, memories of laughter, of whispered promises, of separation and longing. Each memory pressed against them, testing their resolve. But together, they faced the pain, the regrets, the unspoken words. And with each step, each pulse of magic, the veil began to fold in on itself, weakening, unable to sustain its hold over the world. Elira's heart pounded. It's working, she said, her voice trembling with hope. Vaylor nodded, shadows receding as he exhaled deeply. We are stronger together, he said. Finally, the rift began to collapse, the creatures drawn back into the veil, their roars fading into silence. The sky cleared, the air lightened, and the world seemed to exhale. The veil had been closed, not by death, not by sacrifice, but by trust, by union, by the courage to face the darkness together. Vaylor sank to his knees, exhausted but free of the shadows that had clung to him for decades. Elira knelt beside him, her hands still glowing faintly from the runes, magic pulsing through them as a testament to their shared power. He looked at her, and for the first time in years he smiled. Not the cold, distant smile of a king, but the warm, human smile of a man who had survived, who had hoped, who had loved. You saved me, he said softly. No, she replied, shaking her head. We saved each other. Standing amid the quiet aftermath, the rift gone, the veil sealed. The northern lands would take time to heal, rivers to clear, forests to recover, but the kingdom was alive, and the shadows no longer ruled. In the weeks that followed, the palace changed. Vaylor no longer wore the crown fused to his flesh. The shadows around him had faded, leaving only the man beneath. Soldiers and citizens whispered of the miracle that had unfolded, though few could truly understand the depth of what had been accomplished. Elira did not reclaim her title as princess, nor did she seek to sit beside him on the throne. She had not returned for power, but to protect, to heal, and to stand by the man who had carried the weight of the kingdom alone for so long. And Valor? He ruled differently now. No longer distant, no longer feared. He walked among his people, but his heart remained with Alira, who had proven that love and trust could overcome even the darkest curses. One evening, as the sun dipped low and painted the sky with gold and crimson, they stood on the balcony where they had first spoken of the prophecy. The air was warm, scented with new blossoms and the promise of spring returning. Valor took her hand, the same way he had years ago, but now without fear, without shadows pressing between them. "You are not just my equal," he said. "You are my strength, my light, my home." Alira smiled, the runes on her wrists faint now, resting. "And you are mine," she replied. "The man I loved then, and the man I stand beside now. The crown may have bound you once, but it never bound our hearts." For a long moment they watched the sun set, the kingdom alive around them, the veil sealed, the shadows gone. There was no need for words, no need for promises. They had faced the darkness and returned, whole and unbroken. Years passed, and the kingdom healed. Rivers cleared, forests grew, and the people remembered the story of the king and the girl who hid from crowns, who together had closed the veil and broken the curse. One spring morning, as the first light touched the palace towers, a child was born. She had her mother's eyes, bright with curiosity and strength, and a faint shimmer of magic in her veins. Valor and Elira stood beside her, knowing that the legacy of shadow and light would continue, but in a world where love and trust were stronger than fear. The kingdom did not whisper of curses anymore. It whispered of hope, of courage, and of the bond between two souls who had refused to surrender to darkness. And when Valor held Elira's hand, watching their daughter take her first steps, he whispered softly, "This time the crown does not rule. We do, not alone, but together." Elira leaned into him, smiling, and for the first time in a long time they allowed themselves to simply be free from the past, free from fear, and free to love without restraint. The shadows had fallen. The veil was sealed. And a kingdom once shrouded in darkness now bloomed with light.